The steam whistle pierces the night air. Through the windows of the dining car, white linens glow beneath crystal chandeliers as the California Zephyr races across the Nevada desert in 1955. A waiter in a pressed white jacket carefully balances a silver tray while navigating the gentle sway of the carriage. At a corner table, a businessman cuts into a perfectly seared steak as the moon illuminates the passing landscape. This is the story of the railway dining car, an elegant institution that once defined the romance of train travel across America before mysteriously vanishing from the rails almost completely. What happened to these rolling restaurants that served millions of travelers each year? These magnificent dining cars, with their fine china, heavy silver, and attentive service, were once as much a part of the American journey as the destinations themselves. By 1930, over 1,700 dining cars operated on American railways, serving more than 40 million meals annually. Today, they exist primarily in museums or as nostalgic novelties. The decline wasn't sudden, it happened gradually, then all at once, leaving behind empty cars, forgotten recipes, and stories of what once was. The Northern Pacific Railway's North Coast Limited featured dining cars with Haviland china and sterling silver service valued at over $10,000 per car in 1930, equivalent to nearly $175,000 today. The Santa Fe Railway's super chief between Chicago and Los Angeles employed French chefs who prepared meals that rivaled the finest restaurants in New York. Yet within decades, these rolling palaces of gastronomy would largely disappear, victims of changing times, evolving transportation, corporate decisions, and perhaps something more elusive, a shift in the American soul itself. Some say the dining cars were destined to fade, casualties of progress and efficiency. Others insist they were deliberately dismantled, sacrificed on the altar of cost-cutting by railway executives who no longer valued tradition. A few former railroad employees speak in hushed tones about something else, a deeper cultural haunting, as if America itself had turned away from the communal dining experience that the cars represented, preferring instead the isolated convenience of drive-thrus and TV dinners. The story begins not with the dining car's demise, but with its birth, in an era when travel was arduous and uncomfortable, and a decent meal on the move was nothing short of revolutionary. In 1868, George Pullman, already famous for his revolutionary sleeping cars, introduced his first hotel car, the President, featuring a kitchen and dining area. Before this innovation, train passengers faced grim culinary options. At designated stops, they would rush from the train to station restaurants, gulping down barely edible food before the conductor's "all aboard" call. These establishments, known derisively as eating houses or beaneries, earned a notorious reputation. "The passengers have 10 minutes for refreshments," the conductor would announce. "And the company is not responsible for cholera afterward," passengers would grimly joke. Fred Harvey, a British-born entrepreneur, witnessed this deplorable situation in 1876. While traveling west on the Kansas Pacific Railroad, he was served spoiled food at an eating house, inspiring him to establish a chain of respectable trackside restaurants. Harvey's establishments would eventually span the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe railway system, with 47 restaurants and 30 dining cars by 1891. The Fred Harvey Company was revolutionary not only in its food quality, but in its hiring practices. Between 1883 and the 1950s, the company employed more than 100,000 young, unmarried women, known as Harvey Girls, who served as waitresses in pristine uniforms of black dresses with white aprons. These women earned $17.50 monthly, approximately $500 in today's currency, plus room, board, and tips, a respectable salary for women in that era. Zena Northrop was one such Harvey girl, joining the company in 1912 after leaving her family farm in Nebraska. "I was 18 years old and had never been more than 20 miles from home," she recalled in a 1975 interview. "The railroad opened up the entire world to me. We served passengers from every walk of life, cowboys and cattle barons, movie stars heading to Hollywood, ordinary families moving west for a better life. We were part of their journey, if only for a meal." By the early 1900s, dining cars had become fixtures on America's premier trains. The Pennsylvania Railroad operated 190 dining cars in 1910, serving over 8 million meals annually. These weren't merely places to eat, they were statements of corporate pride and national identity. Each railroad competed to offer the most sumptuous dining experience, with unique china patterns, signature dishes, and impeccable service. Yancey Kensington began his career as a 14-year-old dishwasher on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in 1908. By 1935, he had worked his way up to dining car steward on the Capital Limited, the B&O's premier Chicago to Washington service. A dining car wasn't just a restaurant on wheels, Kensington explained in his 1967 memoir. It was a carefully choreographed performance. Every morning before departure, I inspected every piece of silver, every napkin, every table setting. The slightest imperfection was unacceptable. The golden age of the railway dining car coincided with the zenith of passenger rail service in America, roughly from the 1920s through the early 1950s. During this period, over 20,000 passenger trains crisscrossed the nation daily. For many Americans, the dining car represented their first encounter with fine dining, introducing them to French cuisine, proper table settings, and attentive service. Former dining car chef Harold Washington recalled in a 1982 interview, "We served politicians, movie stars, and ordinary folks who'd saved for months to make the journey. In the dining car, everyone received the same treatment, the same heavy silver, the same fine china, the same careful service. It was democracy at its finest, at 80 miles per hour. The Pennsylvania Railroad's Broadway Limited, running between New York and Chicago, featured dining cars, where the tables were adorned with fresh flowers daily, 700 carnations annually according to company records from 1948. The Great Northern's Empire Builder served Puget Sound salmon and Washington apples. The Union Pacific city of Los Angeles offered Delmonico steaks, Maine lobster, and California wines. These dining cars weren't merely feeding travelers, they were showcasing American abundance and sophistication. A 1937 menu from the Southern Pacific's coast, Daylight listed 12 entrees, 8 appetizers, 10 vegetables, and 14 desserts. A complete dinner including soup, salad, entree, vegetables, dessert, and coffee cost $1.25, approximately $25 in today's currency. For the railroads, dining cars were prestige operations rather than profit centers. Records from the Santa Fe Railway show that its dining car service lost $2.7 million in 1949 alone, approximately $33 million in current dollars. Yet these losses were considered worthwhile investments in the railroad's image and passenger goodwill. The dining car's operations were marvels of efficiency within severe constraints. A standard dining car kitchen measured merely 15 by 6 feet, yet could produce hundreds of meals daily. On the New York Central's 20th Century Limited, the kitchen staff might serve 100 breakfasts, 60 lunches, and 150 dinners during a single Chicago-New York journey. These kitchens operated under challenging conditions, limited space, the constant motion of the train, and the need to prepare everything from scratch. Former New York Central chef William Jefferson described working in a dining car kitchen. You're cooking on a moving stove with one hand while holding onto something with the other. If the train rounds a curve too fast, your soup becomes part of the wall decoration. The racial dynamics of dining cars reflected America's complex social hierarchy. While the visible staff, the stewards and waiters, were predominantly white on most railroads, the kitchen staff was largely African American. The Pennsylvania Railroad employed more African American men than any other private company in the country between 1920 and 1950, with many working in dining car services. For many Black Americans, railroad work offered stable employment and respectability in an era of limited opportunities. James Baldwin wrote in his 1961 essay Equal in Paris about his father's pride in his dining car uniform. It was, for him, his only way of being a man in a society that denied his manhood. Dining car stewards wielded considerable power over their domains. They managed staffs of 8 to 12 men, controlled inventories worth thousands of dollars, and were responsible for the railroad's reputation during each meal service. On the Santa Fe Railway, dining car stewards earned annual salaries of $4,800 in 1945, equivalent to approximately $77,000 today, making them among the highest-paid service employees in America. While dining cars represented the pinnacle of railroad hospitality, they also embedded the social stratifications of American society. Until the civil rights movement forced changes, many southern railroads maintained segregated dining facilities. The Atlantic coastlines, Florida Special featured two dining cars in the 1940s, one for white passengers and a smaller club car, where black passengers were permitted to dine. The dining car experience remained remarkably consistent across decades. A passenger on the New York Central in 1950 would have experienced a ritual virtually identical to one from 1925. The same call to dinner announced by a steward walking through the train, the same careful seating by reservation, the same multi-course meals served on branded china. This consistency was intentional, a selling point in a rapidly changing world. Railway dining car departments prided themselves on maintaining traditions, with recipes and service protocols passed down through generations. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad's famous crab cakes, the Northern Pacific's Great Big Baked Potato, the Southern Pacific's chicken pot pie, these signature dishes remained unchanged for decades. What passengers couldn't see was the elaborate infrastructure supporting these rolling restaurants. Every major terminal featured commissaries, where dining cars were provisioned before each journey. The Union Pacific's commissary in Omaha, Nebraska, occupied an entire city block in 1940, with separate departments for meat, produce, baking, silver maintenance, and linen. Before each departure, a dining car would take on hundreds of pounds of food, thousands of pieces of linen, and complete inventories of china and silver. A full dining car crew typically consisted of a steward, a chef, 3 to 4 cooks or assistants, and 4 to 6 waiters. On premier routes like the 20th Century Limited or the Super Chief, these positions were coveted assignments, often held by career railroaders with decades of experience. Pennsylvania Railroad records show that the average dining car employee in 1945 had served the company for 17 years. Behind the elegant experience lurked engineering challenges. Early dining cars were literal fire hazards, with coal or wood-burning stoves presenting constant dangers as trains rumbled across wooden trestles. By the 1920s, most had converted to safer electric kitchens, powered by generators in the baggage cars. Water was stored in 400-gallon tanks beneath the cars, while refrigeration initially relied on ice loaded at division points along the route. As America emerged from World War II, railway dining seemed poised for a new golden era. Railroads invested millions in streamlined equipment, including new dining cars with modern kitchens and air conditioning. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railway introduced 5 new chop house dining cars in 1948, featuring open-hearth charcoal broilers where steaks were prepared in full view of diners. Yet beneath this optimistic surface, troubling signs emerged. Passenger numbers, which had reached record highs during the war years when gasoline was rationed and civilian air travel restricted, began to decline. Americans, flush with post-war prosperity, increasingly turned to automobiles for shorter journeys and airplanes for longer ones. The numbers tell the story. In 1945, American railroads carried 75.9% of intercity passengers. By 1950, that share had fallen to 46.2%. By 1960, it would plummet to just 27.2%. With this passenger exodus came a cascade of consequences for dining car services. As passenger numbers declined, dining cars increasingly operated below capacity, exacerbating their already unprofitable economics. Railroad executives, facing shrinking revenues, began questioning the wisdom of maintaining such elaborate services for dwindling audiences. The Pennsylvania Railroad's annual report for 1954 noted that its dining car department lost $4.2 million that year, approximately $45 million in today's dollars. The dining car's decline unfolded against a backdrop of larger troubles for passenger rail. America's post-war transportation policies heavily favored highways and airports over railroads. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 allocated $25 billion for interstate highway construction, while the Federal Aviation Act of 1958 provided substantial funding for airport development. Railroads, by contrast, received little federal support for passenger operations while remaining burdened by regulations dating to the early 20th century. Until regulatory reforms in the late 1950s, railroads could not easily abandon unprofitable routes or adjust service levels without lengthy regulatory proceedings. This regulatory environment created perverse incentives. Unable to discontinue money-losing passenger trains entirely, many railroads instead degraded service quality to discourage ridership, a practice some critics called the murder of the passenger train. Dining cars, as highly visible and expensive amenities, became prime targets for cost-cutting. The first casualties were the china and silver. Between 1949 and 1954, most major railroads replaced their heavy custom-made dining car china with lighter, standardized patterns that required less handling and withstood mechanical dishwashing. Sterling silver flatware and hollowware gave way to silver-plated or even stainless steel replacements. Next came menu simplification. The multi-page menus offering dozens of choices gradually shrank. The Illinois Central's Panama Limited menu featured 38 entree options in 1946. By 1959, the same train offered just 12. Elaborate tableside preparations disappeared, as did many labor-intensive signature dishes. Staffing levels followed the downward trend. Where a premier dining car once carried a crew of 10 to 12, by the late 1950s, many operated with just 6 or 7 staff members. This reduction inevitably affected service quality, further accelerating the cycle of passenger dissatisfaction and declining ridership. Some railways experimented with alternative dining formats designed to reduce costs. The automat car, introduced by several Eastern railroads in the 1950s, resembled a rolling vending machine, with prepackaged sandwiches and snacks dispensed through glass doors. The coffee shop car offered counter service rather than table service, eliminating the need for waiters. A few railroads bucked this trend, maintaining traditional dining car service as a competitive advantage. The Santa Fe's Super Chief continued offering full-service dining through the 1960s, with linen tablecloths, fresh flowers, and 7-course dinners. The Great Northern's Empire Builder featured ranch car, dining rooms with Western-themed decor and menus highlighting regional specialties. But these were increasingly exceptions in a landscape of retrenchment. By 1960, dining car service had disappeared entirely from many secondary routes, replaced by snack bars or no food service at all. Even on main lines, dining cars often operated only during peak meal periods rather than throughout the journey. Old-timers in the industry viewed these changes with dismay. "We're not running dining cars anymore," lamented retired Pennsylvania Railroad steward Thomas Kelly in a 1963 interview. "We're running glorified cafeterias. The art is disappearing before our eyes." The 1960s brought a perfect storm of challenges. The continuing expansion of the interstate highway system and the introduction of jet passenger service on most major air routes further eroded rail passenger numbers. Between 1958 and 1970, more than 60,000 miles of passenger train routes were abandoned. For dining car staff, these changes brought personal hardship. Edgar Williams, who had served as a waiter on the Atlantic Coast Line's Florida trains for 22 years, found himself without a job when dining service was discontinued in 1966. "I was 52 years old with a high school education and experience that suddenly nobody wanted," he recalled in a 1975 oral history. "The railroad had been my whole life. Then one day it was gone." The dining car's twilight years coincided with broader social changes. The civil rights movement challenged the racial hierarchies embedded in railroad employment practices. The women's movement questioned gender roles that had long defined service industries. Labor unions fought against staffing cuts and deteriorating working conditions. Meanwhile, America's relationship with food was evolving. Fast food chains expanded rapidly, offering quick, standardized meals. TV dinners brought convenience to home cooking. The formal dining traditions that dining cars had long represented seemed increasingly anachronistic to younger Americans raised on drive-thrus and TV trays. By 1970, America's passenger rail system teetered on the edge of collapse. The Penn Central Railroad's bankruptcy that year, then the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history, highlighted the dire financial straits facing most railroad companies. Many industry observers predicted the imminent end of intercity passenger rail service in the United States. In this crisis atmosphere, Congress passed the Rail Passenger Service Act of 1970, creating the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, commonly known as Amtrak, to preserve a basic network of passenger trains. Amtrak began operations on May 1, 1971, taking over selected passenger routes from private railroads. The creation of Amtrak preserved passenger rail service in America, but it marked the definitive end of the classic dining car era. Faced with severe budget constraints and a mandate to reduce operating losses, Amtrak standardized dining services across its system, abandoning the distinctive traditions of individual railroads. Gone were the custom china patterns, the regional specialties, and much of the formal service protocol that had defined railway dining. In their place came plastic plates, simplified menus, and more efficient service systems designed to maximize revenue and minimize costs. Amtrak inherited a hodgepodge of dining cars from various railroads, many approaching the end of their useful lives. Budget constraints limited maintenance and prevented significant new equipment purchases. By the mid-1970s, many dining cars in Amtrak service were more than 20 years old, showing visible signs of wear and mechanical fatigue. Despite these challenges, Amtrak initially attempted to maintain some semblance of traditional dining car service on its long-distance routes. The Broadway Limited between New York and Chicago still featured linen tablecloths and fresh flowers in the early Amtrak years. The Coast Starlight between Los Angeles and Seattle became known for its relatively elaborate dining service, including regional wines and multi-course meals. Former Santa Fe dining car steward Richard Martinez, who joined Amtrak in 1971, described the transition. "We tried to keep the standards up, but the resources kept shrinking. Where we once had 6 waiters in a dining car, now we had 3. Where we once made everything from scratch, now more and more came pre-prepared. You can only do so much with what you're given." The 1970s brought additional challenges in the form of energy crises and economic recessions. Amtrak's annual appropriation became a political football in Congress, with funding levels fluctuating unpredictably from year to year. Food service, as a visible cost center, frequently faced budget cuts. A particularly controversial moment came in 1981 when Amtrak briefly introduced reconstituted food service on several routes, essentially airline-style meals reheated on board. The passenger rebellion was immediate and vociferous. Letters to Congress and the Department of Transportation protested the change, leading Amtrak to reverse course and restore more traditional dining service on most long-distance trains. This episode highlighted a fundamental dilemma that would continue to haunt Amtrak's dining service. Passengers expected traditional dining car amenities, but few were willing to pay the full cost of providing them. By the early 1980s, Amtrak estimated that its dining car operations lost approximately $50 million annually, a significant drain on its limited budget. Various reform attempts followed. In the mid-1980s, Amtrak experimented with cross-training dining car staff to perform multiple roles, reducing crew sizes. In the early 1990s, it introduced all-electric dining cars that eliminated the need for specialized cooking equipment, simplifying operations and maintenance. These efforts achieved only marginal improvements. A 1991 Amtrak internal study concluded that food service accounted for approximately 18% of the corporation's annual operating deficit despite generating only 8% of its revenue. The political environment grew increasingly challenging during this period. The Reagan administration proposed eliminating Amtrak subsidies entirely in each of its budget proposals. While Congress consistently rejected these proposals, the persistent threat reinforced a cost-cutting mindset throughout the organization. Through the 1990s, Amtrak continued operating traditional dining cars on most long-distance routes, though with increasingly simplified service protocols and menu offerings. The white-jacketed waiters gradually disappeared, replaced by servers in casual uniforms. The multiple-page menus shrank to single cards with limited options. Former passengers noticed the changes. "I rode the Empire Builder from Chicago to Seattle in 1965 and again in 1995, recalled retired teacher Marion Thornton in a 2005 interview. In 1965, dining was an experience: china, silver, linens, fresh flowers, and a steward who treated you like royalty. In 1995, it was functional: plastic plates, paper napkins, and harried servers trying to do 3 jobs at once. It was like comparing a 5-star restaurant to a diner." The Amtrak Reform and Accountability Act of 1997 mandated that Amtrak develop a plan to eliminate its operating subsidy entirely by 2002, an unrealistic goal that nonetheless increased pressure for cost reductions. Food service operations, consistently unprofitable, again became targets for savings. Meanwhile, changes in American dining habits continued. Fast food chains expanded their reach, offering drive-through convenience that train dining couldn't match. Casual dining restaurant chains flourished, making formal dining seem increasingly old-fashioned. These broader cultural shifts reinforced the impression that traditional dining cars were anachronisms, artifacts from a different era. A significant turning point came in the early 2000s when Amtrak introduced simplified dining service on several routes. This model eliminated table service entirely, replacing it with cafeteria-style meal delivery, where passengers selected pre-plated-in trays from a service counter. While this reduced labor costs significantly, it further distanced the experience from traditional dining car service. The 2008 financial crisis and subsequent recession brought new budgetary pressures. Amtrak's federal subsidy remained constant in nominal terms through this period, representing a decline in real purchasing power. Food service costs were again scrutinized, with Congress specifically questioning dining car losses. In 2011, Amtrak appointed a chief of customer service with a mandate to reduce dining car losses while improving the passenger experience. The resulting initiatives included centralized food preparation facilities, standardized recipes, and consistent branding across routes. While these changes improved consistency, they further homogenized the dining experience, eliminating the regional variations that had once characterized railway dining. A more fundamental shift began in 2015 when Amtrak CEO Joseph Boardman announced plans for contemporary dining service on selected routes. This model eliminated traditional dining cars entirely on some trains, replacing them with café cars offering prepackaged meals that passengers could eat at their seats or in lounge areas. The changes accelerated under subsequent Amtrak leadership. In 2018, Amtrak announced the elimination of traditional dining car service on all single-night routes east of the Mississippi, affecting iconic trains like the Silver Meteor, the Crescent, and the Lake Shore Limited. In their place came flexible dining, prepackaged meals that could be reheated and served with minimal staff intervention. Passenger reactions were overwhelmingly negative. Online forums and social media filled with complaints about quality, presentation, and the loss of the dining car's social aspect. Railroad advocacy organizations protested the changes, arguing that dining cars were essential to the long-distance train experience. The dining car isn't just about food, argued Jim Matthews, president of the Rail Passengers Association, in a 2019 interview. It's about the community that forms around the table, the strangers who become acquaintances over a meal, the landscape unfolding outside the window as you dine. When you eliminate that, you're cutting out the heart of train travel. Amtrak defended the changes as necessary cost-saving measures, noting that dining car operations lost approximately $20 million annually on eastern routes alone. Officials also suggested that younger passengers preferred more flexible dining options rather than fixed mealtimes and assigned seating. The COVID-19 pandemic that began in 2020 accelerated these trends. Citing health concerns, Amtrak further reduced dining service across its network, replacing most remaining table service with prepackaged meals that minimized staff-passenger interaction. While presented as temporary measures, many observers feared these changes would become permanent once the health crisis subsided. By 2022, traditional dining car service survived on only a handful of Amtrak's western long-distance routes: the California Zephyr, the Empire Builder, the Southwest Chief, the Coast Starlight, and the Sunset Limited. Even on these trains, the experience had been significantly modified, with simplified menus, reduced staffing, and more casual service protocols. Meanwhile, in Europe and Asia, luxury trains like the Venice Simplon Orient Express and Japan's cruise train, 7 stars, demonstrated that traditional rail dining could still thrive as a premium experience. These trains featured elaborate multi-course meals served in opulent dining cars, attracting passengers willing to pay thousands of dollars for the experience. A few private operations in the United States similarly preserved aspects of traditional dining car culture. The Grand Canyon Railway in Arizona offered meals in restored vintage dining cars. The American Orient Express, later renamed Grand Lux Rail Journeys, operated luxury charter trains with full-service dining cars until ceasing operations in 2008. These exceptions highlighted a paradoxical aspect of the dining car's decline. It vanished from mainstream travel, even as it became a nostalgic luxury experience for those who could afford it. The democratized fine dining that dining cars once represented, accessible to middle-class travelers, largely disappeared, replaced by either minimal service or exclusive high-end offerings. Today, the physical remnants of America's dining car heritage are scattered across the country. The California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento displays the elegant Cachiti dining car from the Santa Fe's Super Chief. The Museum of Transportation in St. Louis preserves a Baltimore and Ohio dining car from the 1950s. Hundreds more sit in private collections, tourist railroads, or restaurant conversions. The Pullman dining car Colonial Crafts, built in 1928 for the Pennsylvania Railroad, now serves as a restaurant in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum's Deer Park dining car hosts special events and dinner parties. These preserved artifacts offer glimpses of an experience that once was commonplace but is now extraordinary. Beyond the physical cars themselves, dining car heritage lives on in artifacts and memories. Collectors treasure dining car china, silver, and menus. Railroad museums display dining car uniforms, kitchen equipment, and photographs. Online forums buzz with memories from former passengers and employees, preserving stories that might otherwise be lost. Martha Johnson, now 92, worked as a Harvey girl from 1948 to 1952 before becoming a dining car hostess on the Santa Fe Railway. "We weren't just serving food," she reflected in a recent interview. "We were creating memories. 50 years later, I still hear from passengers who remember their meals on our trains." That was the magic of the dining car. It stayed with you long after the journey ended. The dining car's disappearance reflects broader changes in American society: the triumph of convenience over ceremony, the decline of communal experiences, the erosion of craftsmanship and personal service. Yet it also raises questions about what we sacrifice in the name of efficiency and cost-effectiveness. Economic analyses invariably showed dining cars to be unprofitable enterprises, costing more to operate than they generated in revenue. From a purely financial perspective, their elimination seemed logical and even inevitable. Yet this calculus failed to capture their intangible value, their contribution to the overall passenger experience, their cultural significance, their role in making rail travel distinctive. Some rail advocates argue that Amtrak's emphasis on dining car cost reduction has been self-defeating, that eliminating or degrading this signature aspect of rail travel has accelerated passenger attrition rather than improving financial performance. They point to European and Asian passenger railways that maintain high-quality dining services as integral components of their operations. Others suggest that the dining car's decline reflects a deeper American ambivalence about public transportation, a reluctance to invest in amenities that enhance shared mobility while lavishly funding private automobile infrastructure. The dining car, in this view, represents a victim of political choices rather than inevitable market forces. Climate change concerns and renewed interest in sustainable transportation have sparked some reconsideration of rail travel's role in America's transportation future. Several proposals for expanded passenger rail service include provisions for enhanced dining options, suggesting recognition of their importance to the overall passenger experience. In 2021, responding to passenger complaints and congressional pressure, Amtrak announced plans to restore traditional dining car service on several Western long-distance routes that had seen service reductions during the pandemic. While falling short of a system-wide revival, this move suggested that traditional dining cars might yet have a future in American rail travel. So what happened to the railway dining car? The answer resists simple explanation. Technological change, economic pressures, management decisions, political choices, cultural shifts all played roles in its decline. Like the passenger train itself, the dining car didn't disappear because of any single factor, but through a complex interplay of forces that gradually eroded its position in American travel culture. Some blame short-sighted management, arguing that railroad executives and later Amtrak administrators failed to recognize the dining car's value as a marketing tool and passenger amenity. Others point to government policy that disadvantaged rail travel generally, creating conditions where dining car losses became unsustainable. A few former railroad employees speak of something more intangible, a loss of pride and craftsmanship in American service industries, a cultural shift away from the values that dining cars embodied. "We used to care about doing things right, not just doing them cheaply," reflected former Amtrak chef Donald Williams in a 2015 interview. "That's what's been lost, the commitment to excellence regardless of cost." There's a certain melancholy in visiting the preserved dining cars in museums, these elegant spaces frozen in time, their tables permanently set for passengers who will never arrive. They stand as monuments to a different conception of travel, one that emphasized journey rather than destination, experience rather than efficiency. Perhaps the most telling artifacts are the menus, those elaborately printed documents that once offered travelers remarkable choices at every meal. A 1952 menu from the Northern Pacific's North Coast Limited included caviar, lobster thermidor, and baked Alaska, dishes that would challenge many fine restaurants today, let alone a kitchen on wheels crossing the Montana plains. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad's Capital Limited menu from April 1949 featured this note. The food served in this dining car is prepared fresh on board from the finest ingredients available. Our chefs take pride in maintaining the B&O's 122-year tradition of culinary excellence. Such statements reflected genuine institutional pride, not mere marketing language. Today, Americans can still ride trains across the country, but the dining car experience that once defined rail travel has largely vanished. What remains is either a pale imitation of the original or an exclusive luxury beyond the reach of ordinary travelers. The democratic fine dining that dining cars once represented, available to anyone who purchased a train ticket, exists now primarily in memory and museum displays. In the quiet car of an Amtrak train crossing Nebraska in 2023, an elderly passenger unwraps a prepackaged meal and places it on his tray table. Through the window, the same landscape unfolds that passengers viewed from dining cars a century ago. But instead of white linens and silver service, instead of freshly prepared meals and attentive waiters, there is only plastic packaging and solitary consumption. Some say the dining car disappeared because it had to, a casualty of economic reality in a world where speed and efficiency trump all other values. Others insist it vanished because we allowed it to, because we chose, collectively, to sacrifice quality for convenience, experience for expedience. A few suggest something more mysterious, that the dining car represented an America that no longer exists, a culture that valued craft, service, and shared experience in ways we have forgotten. Perhaps all are right. Perhaps none fully capture the complex interplay of forces that transformed the railway dining car from an everyday experience to a nostalgic memory within a single lifetime. The whistle still blows, the trains still run. But the dining car, that unique American institution that once served 40 million meals annually as it rolled across the continent, has largely vanished, leaving behind silver tarnished with age, china gathering dust in collections, and the fading memories of those who once dined at 80 miles per hour beneath chandeliers that swayed with the rhythm of the rails.